The Washington Commanders are cutting loose one of their veteran players, and it's tied directly to the acquisition of quarterback Carson Wentz. More reactions to that trade and an updated mock draft accounting for the changes happening around the league, sorting out the rubble after the explosive couple days the NFL has experienced on the Locked On Commanders podcast.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Commanders fans, to the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, free and available on all platforms, and we thank you for making us your first listen or view of the day. Special shout out to those of you joining us over on YouTube. I am David Harrison, covering the Commanders for Sports Illustrated's FanNation. My co-host, Chris Russell, the Rooster, one half of the Russell and Medhurst show on the Team 980. Find Chris and Pete there Monday through Friday from 3 to 7 p.m. Eastern or anytime, along with the Locked On Commanders podcast via the Odyssey app. When we're not there or here, we're on Twitter at DHarrison82, at RussellMania621, and at LO Commanders. We thank you again for making us your first view or your first listen of the day. It came in offseason later than most of us would have liked, but Landon Collins on his way out of Washington, the 28-year-old safety turned hybrid linebacker during the 2021 NFL season. He spent 7 years in the National Football League so far, 4 of them with the New York Giants and 3 of them with the Washington football franchise under all 3 names that it had in that 3-year span. Signed a 6-year deal, $84 million is what that deal was worth up to with Washington back in 2019. So a 6-year, $84 million deal, again, happening back in 2019. And basically got to play 3 years of that deal, leaving now in 2022 again, and that's reported. None of these moves are official as of right now, but if it does indeed happen, Landon Collins was scheduled to make $16.2 million against the salary cap in 2022. By releasing him, the Washington Commanders would save $6.6 million in salary cap space, which is what is being reported they will save by releasing him. Look, we knew he was one of the players that Martin Mayhew was talking to his representatives. He mentioned the combine. He was talking to Terry's guys. He was talking to some other guys, also talking to Landon's guys. And obviously that's about a contract restructure. Now, I mentioned it here recently on the Locked On Commanders podcast that restructures typically are pretty simple because usually the player is getting paid the same amount of money. It's just when they get paid the same amount of money, how it gets paid, how it gets accounted for in NFL lingo, because that's how it impacts the salary cap. Or sometimes the player actually even gets more guaranteed money to take less money off the top of the total value of the contract in order to, again, free up dollars for the team. The fact that any type of restructure deal was taking an extended period of time hinted at the Washington Commanders asking Landon to take a pay cut, and that's exactly what was happening. Collins told ESPN's Josina Anderson on Thursday that Washington asked him to take a pay cut in these renegotiations. He said, okay, he would take the pay cut. I'm surprised. I'm not going to lie, but upstanding. Hey, look, he played in the box against his will. Now he's willing to take a pay cut. So maybe Landon Collins, I don't know, maybe he got a little bit of a bad rap with his reputation, but he said he would take a pay cut. Don't know the exact numbers of what that pay cut entailed, but then Washington asked him to take another pay cut. And this came after the news that they were trading for Carson Wentz, at which time Collins said he would rather test the free agent market. And look, asking a man to take a pay cut once, totally reasonable. Asking him to take a pay cut twice before you even announce the first pay cut, that's a little bit, I don't know that I blame Landon Collins for that decision a little bit. Listen, according to Over the Cap, a pre-June 1st cut of Landon Collins, again, Washington Commanders would eat $9.6 million in dead cap this year, $5.52 million in dead cap next year, $1.4 million in dead cap in 2024. That's a pre-June 1st cut, which is reflected in those numbers that everybody's tweeting, everybody's talking about with the $16.2 million cap hit and the savings of $6.6 million. Now, again, according to Over the Cap, a post-June 1st cut of Landon Collins would actually only carry a $4.2 million dead cap number in 2022. It would also carry a $4.2 million dead cap number in 2023 and a $1.2 million dead cap number in 2024. So smaller dead cap numbers, but again, there are bonuses and other things that kind of kick in that maybe that Washington have to pay. So the assumption, obviously, according to the reporting, is that he will be a pre-June 1st cut and will not be a part of the Washington Commanders moving forward, basically because they asked him to take not one, but 2 pay cuts in the exact same offseason. So Landon Collins exercising basically his freedom of decision to not take a second pay cut from the Washington Commanders. We are going to exercise our strength of the Locked On Podcast Network here in our next segment as we hear from hosts around the network as they react to the news Carson Wentz is moving to DC. But first, it's that time of year again, guys. It's March, which means college basketball's tournament is finally upon us. And for all your latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks again, Commanders fans, for making us your first listen or your first view every single day. Make sure you're also following the Locked On NFL podcast, Locked On Experts, covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free, and it's available wherever you get podcasts, just like the Locked On Commanders podcast. David Harrison coming to you solo here on Twitter at DHarrison82. Find everything I'm writing about your Washington Commanders at SI.com's FanNation. My co-host Chris Russell not here this week, but you can find him on Twitter at WrestleMania621. The show is at LO Commanders. And of course, Carson Wentz trade. When a player is traded, any player is traded, the ripple effects are profound, especially though when that player is a starting quarterback. Lots of reactions coming in. We got one in the voicemail box, Todd from Utah, letting his thoughts be known.
Well, Carson Wentz. Yep, the Redskins did it again. Picking up a guy who's been struggling in the last few places he's been playing, doesn't show leadership, all that fun stuff, and it's only like $28 million to the cap hit. No big deal. Good job, Washington. That's very impressive. Todd from Utah.
All right, Todd from Utah, brother. We appreciate you calling in and letting us know. Look, if you're out there, Commanders fans, if you support the move, if you think Carson Wentz is the next big thing here in Washington, by all means, let us know. Let us know what we're missing. We're not going to make fun of you. We're not going to ridicule you. I would be more than happy. Confirmation bias is one of the most dangerous things that human beings are pre-programmed with. I would be absolutely happy to receive your opinion and your analysis of why you think Carson Wentz is a good fit for the Washington Commanders and what we're missing, because as of right now, pretty much everybody agrees this is really not a good move for the Commanders. So I'm definitely open. I'm asking for differences of opinions. If you want to add into the conversation, even if you agree with us and you just want to get your words out there like Todd did, 301-615-3577 is the number. Again, 301-615-3577. Some other people around the Locked On network had some things to say about this trade. And let's start with the Locked On Colts podcast chiming in on Carson Wentz heading to the Washington Commanders.
QB movement is at a rapid pace right now. We saw Russell Wilson to the Broncos, Aaron Rodgers staying put, and now 24 hours later, Colts quarterback Carson Wentz been traded to the Washington Commanders as they swap second-round picks, as well as the Colts getting a third-round pick from the Commanders in this year's draft, plus potentially a second-round pick in the 2023 draft if Carson Wentz plays 70% of the snaps. Also, the Commanders took on all of Carson Wentz's salary, meaning the Colts gained over $28 million in salary cap space after this trade letting go of Wentz. They now have over $70 million in cap space, meaning the Colts have the most cap space of any team in the NFL. So the Colts are going to be wheeling and dealing the next week plus. I have to imagine they're going to be very aggressive. We're hearing rumors now about Jimmy Garoppolo potentially being in play for the Colts, but Carson Wentz in his one-year stint in Indianapolis just simply didn't work out. Very inconsistent, wasn't the guy, simply put, wasn't the guy, wasn't a great leader. And overall, the Colts were wise to go in a different direction, cut their loss after a year, and get back what I thought was a very good package from the Commanders. The Commanders seemed a little bit desperate to get Carson Wentz there and paid a heavy price for him. Took all of his contract plus day 2 picks. The Colts moved up in this year's draft as well from 47 to 42. So a lot of movement happening for the Colts here. The Colts have all chips in according to the Colts under Jim Irsay, and they are well on their way to putting themselves in a position to be very aggressive over the next couple of weeks. So make sure you stay tuned to Locked On Colts, your team every day.
All right, once again, insight from the Locked On Colts podcast. And look, it's only been 1 year, guys. So the Locked On Eagles podcast, they had some things to say. Carson Wentz, number 2 overall pick of the Philadelphia Eagles back in 2016. Washington fans, you've seen plenty of Carson over the years because of that selection. You know about him. You know about the Super Bowl win, the trip, the Nick Foles, and all that stuff. But now here, let's hear from the Locked On Eagles podcast.
Gino Camilleri here, host of the Locked On Eagles podcast. The NFL's quarterback carousel keeps on spinning, with the latest addition being Carson Wentz moved from the Indianapolis Colts back to the NFC East, where he will now be the quarterback of the Washington Commanders for at least 2022. The Washington Commanders now take on that extension that Howie Roseman signed Carson Wentz to just a few years ago. They will be on the hook for at least this season and potentially 2 more seasons after that. A report came out today from the Philadelphia Inquirer that Carson Wentz and all the off-field reports are true and were true in his time in Philadelphia, having to be separated from one of the players on that 2017 championship team, where Carson Wentz really focused on himself rather than the team. And now that sinking ship has made its way to Washington, where the Philadelphia Eagles will be able to see Carson Wentz at least 2 times in 2022. And I'm sure he'll get a big old warm welcome from the fans at Lincoln Financial Field.
All right, so that was the Locked On Eagles podcast. And finally, guys, let's hear from the Locked On NFL brand, Ian Stanback, our NFL insider, former NFL player. Let's hear what Ian had to say again about the trade of Carson Wentz from the Indianapolis Colts to your Washington Commanders.
Carson Wentz traded from Indianapolis to the Washington Commanders in exchange for 2 third-round picks, and the 2 teams swapped their second-round picks. So now Indy will pick at 42 in the upcoming draft, which will be their first pick of the draft, because guess what, Isaiah? They traded away their first-round pick for Carson Wentz. Just give me your reaction to all of this.
It's starting to sound like Carson Wentz is the boyfriend that nobody wants. And, as they're starting to just pass him around, and they're putting these, conditional, compensatory, picks on him and saying, hey, if he plays 70% of the time, then he's worth more to you. So we'll give more. Just like what happened to the Colts last year. Obviously, they ended up giving up a first and a third. As you just mentioned, they no longer have a first round pick. So they are passing Carson Wentz along with his entire contract, all $28 million against the cap of the $33 million that are available to the Washington Commanders is now being absorbed by them. And the Commanders obviously seemingly have their guy that they feel comfortable with going forward. But as you mentioned, it leaves a gaping hole for the Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, that it does. But let's focus on what we're going to see in Washington first. Contract aside, don't think about the money right now. Is Carson Wentz an upgrade for Washington?
You know what? I don't think that he is. And I honestly like the move that Washington made last year when they picked up Fitzpatrick. All right, Fitzpatrick. He obviously got hurt in the first week of the season. He dislocated that hip, and obviously he's been out for the entire time. They know a lot more than we know in terms of severity of that, which might be one of the reasons why they're making this seemingly drastic move. This move that they were unable to capitalize on the Russell Wilson trade. So now they're in this sense of desperation to try to get somebody who is comfortable with the conference, somebody who has some kind of former winning percentage underneath their belt, somebody who's proven in the league, and somebody who's a veteran. I think that's the direction that they're going, instead of trying to go in with somebody else who may not be as familiar with this division and this conference, who may not have the experience that he has, and that cannot step into this locker room and seemingly have the respect of the guys and surrounding players. I think that's the direction that they're going. Whether that's going to be successful or not, I'm not sure. I honestly think that Taylor Heineke did a great job last year stepping into that starting role after Fitzmagic went down. And, you would think that there would be a competition battle, but with $28 million against the cap, you would think that he's just walking into this starting position.
Yeah, it's an interesting decision to see the Commanders trade for Carson Wentz, especially you mentioned that they tried to go after Russell Wilson. Obviously, that didn't work out. Russell Wilson now in Denver, but it just seems like a strange fallback option when you could look at the draft. You could look at a bunch of other things, especially with the cap hit. But let's focus on Indy for a second. They now don't really have a quarterback. What is the situation going to be in Indianapolis this season?
Yeah, Indianapolis is in panic mode. They don't have a quarterback that can step up and fill the role that even Carson Wentz was upholding. So now they have to face this free agency and try to fandangle themselves a quarterback that is going to put them in a position to now get into the playoffs. We know that they came up short this past year. Carson Wentz in his last game did not do well. Matter of fact, he only had 300 yards passing in his last 5 games. So I think that they have a great chance of finding somebody that can do a little bit better than that. But in their current stance, they don't have a first round pick, so they're not going to go out there and get a quote unquote franchise quarterback coming out of the draft. They're going to have to utilize those mid round picks that they just received to try to go out there and gain some kind of veteran that's maybe out there on the market that we're unaware of.
All right, Isaiah, let me ask you this question here. I feel like I kind of know your answer already, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think Carson Wentz can be the quarterback on a Super Bowl team? We know that he was a 2017 MVP candidate. Obviously, that team did go to the Super Bowl, but Nick Foles was the quarterback for the Eagles. Can he do it again?
You know, oops, I did it again. I'm not sure if that song is really playing right now because it seems like 2017 was so far long ago. I don't think that he's the guy. I personally don't think that he's the guy. I think that as he steps into that locker room, guys are going to look at him kind of sideways like, what have you done lately? You're getting passed around. Guys understand contracts. Guys understand how players start to fall off and how when you're a quarterback of this stature, when you're a quarterback who has a Super Bowl ring, when you're a quarterback who has led organizations and been franchise type guy, and now all of a sudden you're getting passed around like they don't want you. How is it now that you're going to step into the situation with our team inside our locker room and help advance us to be competitive now in the NFC East? I'm not sure that he's that guy. I'm not sure if he can get that thing back like Stella. We're going to see.
Yeah, it's interesting, too. He's going to be playing the Eagles 2 times per season now in the same division. So returning to the NFC East, definitely going to be an interesting year for Carson Wentz.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to see what happens. Hopefully all the best for him. But at least he has a good defense.
That is true. And of course, we'll keep you updated with any NFL news that is coming in the future. We should have some Deshaun Watson news in the near future. So make sure you stay tuned to Locked On NFL. And Isaiah, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. Again, it's always a pleasure catching up with you.
Of course. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate you.
We'll see you next time, guys.
All right, there you have it. And if you want my full reaction, yesterday I laid out all my thoughts on leadership, on the cap, on draft strategy, all that stuff on yesterday's episode. Just make sure you go check that out. It's available, again, wherever you download podcasts or on YouTube as well. Just search Locked On Commanders. We talked yesterday about the cap and the draft strategy implications that Carson Wentz is bringing with him to the squad. But what about now that Landon Collins is apparently on his way out? We'll also take a look at an updated mock draft accounting for all the madness happening this week. But first, guys, have you tried Built Puffs? Because if you haven't, you're missing out on one of the best parts of the Built.com lineup. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow, and they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite for a reason. A lot of incredible flavors like cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. They're also good, and they're going to be some of your new favorites. And again, all Built Bar products, all Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, including the Puffs. They're low-calorie, high-protein. You can replace your candy bars with these, and you can have a candy bar that's basically 130 calories, give or take, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein compared to a traditional candy bar that has 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. So many flavors and new ones dropping all the time. They dropped a St. Patrick's Day flavor special. That was amazing. At Built Bar, they're all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first, then they figure out how to make it healthy. And I don't know how they do it, but they do it time after time after time. Built.com is where you need to go. Use a promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. Final segment here, the Locked On Commanders podcast. David Harrison solo without my co-host Chris Russell. I am on Twitter at DHarrison82. My co-host Chris Russell at Russellmania621. The show at LO Commanders. Every move shakes up the league. It alters the course of history because literally there are hundreds of men hoping to hear their names in April at the NFL draft. And everything that happens right now is going to impact when those names get called. And for some of them, if their names get called. So Luke Easterling has a very up-to-date mock draft. Total disclosure, guys, Khalil Mack being traded to the Los Angeles Chargers. Literally happening right now as I'm talking into this recording, literally happening. So this mock draft is not going to account for that trade, but this is the most up-to-date trade stemming from the Russell Wilson and Carson Wentz trades that we can get the most up-to-date mock draft, rather, that we can get stemming from those trades. So let's look at what's happened so far. This coming from Luke Easterling at NFL DraftWire. Rattling off the top 5 like we always do. Jacksonville takes Ike Ekwonu, offensive tackle out of NC State, defensive edge. Travon Walker out of Georgia goes to the Detroit Lions with the number 2 overall pick. Houston at number 3 takes Aiden Hutchinson out of Michigan. Kayvon Thibodeau, the edge out of Oregon, goes to the Jets with pick number 4. And pick number 5, the New York Giants, go to Alabama, and they get Evan Neal, the offensive tackle. Go to pick number 11. Washington takes Garrett Wilson, wide receiver out of Ohio State. We've seen this before, but here's what Easterling writes, quote, after trading for Carson Wentz, the Commanders are likely to spend this pick making sure he has as much help as possible. Wilson is an explosive, big play receiver who would pair it with Terry McLaurin to give Wentz plenty of firepower, end quote. And look, if you're going to make Carson Wentz work, give him as many receivers as you can. Recapping the rest of the NFC East, the New York Giants at number 7 also get Jermaine Johnson, the edge rusher out of Florida State. Philadelphia Eagles in the first round, 15, 16, and 19. They take David Ojabo, the edge rusher out of Michigan, Trent McDuffie, the cornerback out of Washington, and Drake London, wide receiver out of USC. The Dallas Cowboys in the first round get Treylon Burks, wide receiver out of Arkansas, with pick number 24, no doubt to make up for Amari Cooper, who is not going to be in Dallas very much longer. Looking into the future the second day of the NFL draft in this mock draft, Washington with the 47th overall pick gets Darian Kinnard, offensive tackle out of Kentucky. Now, they had the 42nd overall pick. Now the Colts have that pick. They use it to take Desmond Ridder, quarterback out of Cincinnati. Not going to lie, would rather have Desmond Ridder out of Cincinnati, but that ship has sailed. Number 73, the third round pick that the Colts get from Washington in that deal. They take Wan'Dale Robinson, wide receiver out of Kentucky. The Seattle Seahawks, they traded Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos. With the 9th pick that they get from the Denver Broncos, they take Malik Willis, quarterback out of Liberty, which is exactly what I expect them to do in real life. And with the 40th overall pick that they also got from the Denver Broncos, to take Andrew Booth Jr., the very talented cornerback out of Clemson. Does Washington need to replace Landon Collins in the NFL draft? I don't think so. I think they already have his replacement in Cam Curl. I think now you're looking for a more cover style safety to play opposite. Maybe that's Bobby McCain, and if he comes back, maybe it's somebody else like a Jalen Petrie out of Baylor here in the NFL draft. But again, plenty of time for Washington to make some more moves. So as these things continue, as we get all the final numbers on the Khalil Mack trade, my understanding is that the Chargers are sending a second-round draft pick to the Chicago Bears. So that's going to make the mock drafts that come out over the weekend all new as well. And we'll see how things start to matriculate onto the board and how they change these mock drafts. In the meantime, guys, we thank you for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listener, your first watch every single day. Now we would like you to make your second listen, the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. Free and available wherever you get podcasts, just like the Locked On Commanders podcast. We will be back on Monday with a whole new batch of mock drafts, reacting to whatever happens between now and Sunday night. If you've got questions or topics you want to discuss, again, tell me how we're wrong about Carson Wentz. Tell me it's a good thing. Tell me why. Send it in to LockedOnWashingtonCommanders@gmail.com or call it in to 301-615-3577. Let us know what you think. Again, that number, 301-615-3577. For Chris Russell of the Russell and Medhurst Show on the Team 980 with Pete Medhurst, I'm David Harrison, writer for SI.com's FanNation. If you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, and thank you for joining us right here on the Locked On Washington Commanders podcast.